Imagine waking up to the sound of waves crashing against a longship, the salty wind biting your skin, and the smell of smoke from a dying fire. You stretch, but your back aches from sleeping on hardwood planks. Before you can even rub the sleep from your eyes, a shadow looms over you, a towering figure with a battle axe strapped to his belt. "Get up," he grunts. "The Jarl wants to see you." This isn't a nightmare. This is your first morning in Viking Age Scandinavia, and if you don't act fast, it might be your last. You might think you're tough. You go to the gym, you've camped in the woods, maybe even handled an axe at a Renaissance fair. But none of that would save you here. The Vikings didn't just survive this world. They thrived in it, carving out legends with blood and iron. And you? You wouldn't last a day. Let's start with the cold. Modern Scandinavia is chilly, but back then, the Little Ice Age was creeping in. Winters were brutal, with temperatures plunging so low that even the Norse gods would have shivered. You'd wake up to frost clinging to your furs, your breath hanging in the air like a ghost. And no, there's no central heating, no cozy electric blankets, just a meager fire, if you were lucky, and a constant fear that your food stores wouldn't last until spring. Then there's the hunger. You think skipping breakfast is hard? Try surviving on stale flatbread, fermented fish that smells like death, and whatever meager crops didn't freeze in the ground. Meat was a luxury, hunted or stolen in raids. And if you couldn't stomach the rancid taste of skyr or the chewy strips of dried seal blubber, well, starvation was always an option. But hunger is the least of your worries. Because in this world, every stranger is a potential enemy. Viking society was built on honor, but also on violence. Insult the wrong man, and you'd find yourself in a home gang, a duel to the death. Lose, and your body would be tossed into a shallow grave. Win, and you make new enemies. There were no police, no courts, just the law of steel and the whispers of reputation. And let's talk about the work. No office jobs here. No scrolling on your phone during lunch breaks. Your day would be backbreaking labor, farming rocky soil, chopping wood until your hands bled, hauling heavy stones to build shelters. Even the children worked, their small hands callous from chores. There was no weekend, no vacations, just endless toil under a sky that either burned you with summer sun or froze you with winter's bite. But the worst part? The constant fear. Fear of raids, fear of starvation, fear of the gods' wrath. The Vikings didn't live in some romanticized age of adventure. They lived on the edge of survival, where one wrong move meant death. And you wouldn't just struggle. You'd break. And this is just the beginning. Because surviving the land was one thing. Surviving the people? That was a whole different nightmare. Now, let's say you somehow make it through that first brutal day. The cold didn't kill you. The hunger hasn't broken you yet. You've managed to avoid picking a fight with a warrior twice your size. But night falls, and with it comes a new kind of terror. Picture this. You're huddled in a dim longhouse, the air thick with smoke from the central hearth. The walls are lined with shields, the rafters hung with drying herbs and old weapons. Around you, men and women laugh, drink from horns of mead, and trade stories. It feels almost welcoming, until you realize the stories aren't just tales. They're warnings. One man leans in, his voice low. He speaks of Draugr, the walking dead, corpses that rise from their graves to slaughter the living. Another whispers of a Huldra, a beautiful woman with a tale who lures men into the forest to never return. And then there's Fenrir, the monstrous wolf chained beneath the earth, destined to break free at Ragnarok and devour the sun itself. To the Vikings, these weren't myths. They were real. Every shadow in the forest, every creak of the ice, every unexplained illness, it was all the work of unseen forces. And if you didn't respect them, if you didn't leave the right offerings, speak the right prayers, with the right charms, you were as good as dead. Superstition ruled every aspect of life. Drop a knife, and it had to be picked up in a specific way, or it would invite bad luck. A sneeze at the wrong moment could mean the gods were displeased. Even something as simple as how you entered a house mattered. Walk in the wrong way, and you might bring misfortune to the entire household. And then there were the rituals. Human sacrifice wasn't just a dark rumor. It happened. Prisoners of war, slaves, even volunteers, all could be offered to the gods in exchange for victory, good harvests, or safe voyages. The famous blood eagle execution wasn't just a method of killing. It was a sacred act, a way to send a message to both mortals and deities. But let's say you survive the night. You wake up, shaken but alive. Now comes the real test, proving your worth. Because in Viking society, you were nothing unless you could contribute. And if you couldn't, well, there was always an open spot in the slave pens. Slaves, thralls, as they were called, with a backbone of Norse life. Captured in raids or born into servitude, they did the hardest labor with no hope of freedom. And if a master died, his slaves were often killed and buried with him, to serve him in the afterlife. You might think, I'm strong, I could fight my way out. But without training, without knowing how to wield an axe or shield properly, you'd be cut down before you took 2 steps. Viking warriors trained from childhood. Their battles weren't chaotic brawls. They were deadly, disciplined dances of steel. And what if you were a woman? Life wasn't any easier. Norse women had more rights than in many other cultures. They could own property, divorce, and even lead in some cases, but their days were filled with grinding labor. Weaving, cooking, brewing, tending livestock, raising children. And if raiders came, they were expected to defend the home with whatever was at hand, a knife, a fire iron, sheer desperation. But here's the cruelest twist of all. Even if you did everything right, even if you worked hard, fought well, honored the gods, death was always waiting. And in the Viking mind, how you died mattered just as much as how you lived. Because the afterlife wasn't guaranteed. Only the best warriors made it to Valhalla. The rest? They might wander the misty halls of hell, a bleak shadow of existence. Or worse, be swallowed by Niflheim's endless cold. And this is just survival. Because if you think daily life was hard, just wait until you face the Vikings at their most ruthless, on the battlefield, or worse, on the open sea. You've endured the cold, the hunger, the backbreaking labor. You've learned to hold your tongue and keep your head down. But now comes the true test, the moment that separates the weak from the strong, the living from the dead. Because in Viking Age Scandinavia, no one stays safe forever. Sooner or later, you'll have to step onto a longship. Imagine the scene. The shoreline recedes behind you as the ship cuts through black, churning waves. The sail, painted with fearsome symbols, snaps in the wind. Around you, warriors check their weapons, axes sharpened to a razor's edge, swords with runes etched into the steel. Some laugh, others chant, a few sit in silence. But one thing unites them, the hunger for what's coming. You're gripping the side of the boat, so hard your knuckles turn white. Because the open ocean in the Viking Age wasn't just dangerous, it was a death sentence waiting to happen. No GPS, no weather forecasts, no Coast Guard coming to save you if things went wrong. Just a vast, merciless expanse of water and the fragile wooden hull between you and drowning. Storms could rise in an instant, waves tall as mountains smashing down with enough force to snap a ship in half. If you survived the tempest, there was still the threat of getting lost, sailing for weeks with dwindling supplies, drinking stale water crawling with worms, eating leather strips just to fill your stomach. Some crews resorted to casting lots, sacrificing one of their own to the gods in hopes of calming the seas. And then land, but not safety, because if this was a raid, what awaited you was worse than any storm. Picture the chaos. The alarm horns blare as your ship crashes onto the beach. Men leap into the shallows, axes raised, screams tearing from their throats. You follow, your heart pounding, so loud it drowns out everything else. The village ahead is already burning. Women and children run. Defenders rally, but they're outnumbered, unprepared. This is where you learn the true meaning of violence. Battles weren't glorious duels under fair skies. They were butchery. Bones shattered under hammer blows. Entrails spilled on a mud. Men gasped their last breaths with spears jutting from their chests. And if you hesitated, if you froze for even a second, that was it. No second chances. No mercy. But let's say you fight. You survive. You even take plunder, an arm ring, a sack of silver, a captive. Now comes another test, getting home. Because the sea doesn't care if you're a hero, and neither do the other Vikings. Betrayal was common. A crewmate might slit your throat for a bigger share of loot. A rival chieftain could ambush your ship on the return voyage. Even your own jarl might decide you're more useful dead than alive. Trust was a luxury few could afford. And what if you were captured instead? Slavery was a fate worse than death. You'd be worked until your body broke, beaten for sport, sold like livestock at market. Some thralls were sacrificed at their master's funeral, strangled and left to rot in the grave beside him. Others spent decades in chains, watching as the world moved on without them. But here's the cruelest twist. Even the victors paid a price. Raiders came home missing eyes, limbs, brothers. The mead halls were loud with songs of glory, but the nights were long, haunted by the faces of the slain. The Vikings didn't just bring death to others. They carried it with them, a weight that never lifted. And yet, they did it again and again, because in their world, there was no other choice. To stop raiding was to invite weakness. To show mercy was to risk destruction. The cycle never ended, which makes you wonder, were the Vikings monsters, or were they just survivors in a world that rewarded brutality? The answer might terrify you, because the truth is, in their place, you might have done the same. You survived the raid. You made it back alive, your hands still trembling from the weight of a bloodied axe. The mead flows freely in the longhouse that night, and for the first time, you feel something resembling acceptance. The warriors clap you on the back, the Jarl nods in your direction. You've earned your place. But this is where the real danger begins. Because now, you're no longer an outsider. You're part of the tribe, and that means you're tangled in its politics, its feuds, its unspoken rules. One wrong word, one misstep, and the respect you've fought for could vanish in an instant. Take the laws of this world, for example. Viking society had strict codes, just not in the way we think of laws today. There were no prisons, no police. Justice was personal. If a man killed your brother, you were expected to avenge him. If someone stole from you, you had to reclaim your honor through blood or silver. Fail to do so, and you'd be marked as weak. And weakness was an invitation for predators. Even something as simple as a gift could be a trap. When a chieftain handed you a sword, was it truly generosity? Or was it a debt you'd one day be forced to repay? The Norse didn't believe in free favors. Every act of kindness was an investment, every alliance a calculation. And if the scales tipped against you, that same chieftain might demand your loyalty in a war you wanted no part of, or worse, your life. Then there were the family feuds, generational blood vendettas that spanned decades. A grandfather's insult could become a grandson's war. You might think you're safe, only to learn that your new friend's father once killed your uncle, and now you are part of that story. There was no escaping it. The sagas are filled with tales of men who tried to walk away, only to be hunted down like dogs. And God's help you if you fell in love. Marriage wasn't about romance, it was strategy. A woman's hand could seal an alliance or end a feud, but cross her family, and her brothers would come for your head. Even divorce was dangerous. While Norse women could leave their husbands, doing so often meant igniting a firestorm of retaliation. But let's say you navigate all of this. You keep your head down, you pay your debts, you avoid offending the wrong people. Surely now you can relax? No, because nature hasn't finished with you yet. Famine was a constant specter. One bad winter, one failed crop, and entire villages starved. The Norse didn't just fear hunger. They worshipped against it, offering sacrifices to Freyr, god of fertility, in desperate hope the soil would relent. When food ran out, people ate bark, boiled leather. Some turned to cannibalism. The sagas whisper of mothers abandoning infants in the snow to save the stronger children. Disease was even worse. A simple cut could fester into a death sentence. Tooth infections rotted men from the inside out. And when plagues came, they didn't just kill, they erased whole families. No antibiotics, no painkillers, just agony and the slow, certain creep of the grave. So ask yourself, could you really endure this? Year after year? Never knowing if the next winter would be your last, if the next feud would claim your life, if the next raid would leave you bleeding on foreign soil? The Vikings didn't just survive this world. They carved their names into it with fire and steel. But the price was unimaginable. And yet, there's one final truth. One that changes everything. Because the Viking Age ended. You've endured the cold, the raids, the hunger, the betrayals. You've survived long enough to see your hair turn gray, your hands grow rough with scars. And now, as you sit by the fire in the fading light of your years, you hear whispers of change. Christian missionaries arrive, speaking of a new God, one who preaches forgiveness, not vengeance. Trade routes bring foreign coins instead of bloodied swords. Kings unite under single banners, and the old ways, the raids, the feuds, the blood sacrifices begin to fade. The world is shifting, and for the first time, you wonder, was it all worth it? The Viking Age didn't end in fire and ruin. It ended with a sigh, a slow, quiet surrender to something softer, but also something sturdier. Farms replaced fortresses. Churches rose where once there had been sacred groves. The children of warriors became merchants, diplomats, settlers. The axe was traded for the plow. But here's the truth no saga will tell you. The Vikings didn't disappear because they were weak. They vanished because they were adaptable. They saw the tides of history turning and chose to ride them rather than drown. In the end, their greatest strength wasn't their brutality. It was their ability to change. So ask yourself again, could you have survived a day in Viking Age Scandinavia? The answer is probably no. But that's not the real question. The real question is, would you have been brave enough to become something else when the world demanded it? Because that's the lesson of the Vikings. Not how they died, but how they lived, and how they let go. If this journey through their world left you hungry for more dark histories and forgotten truths, don't forget to subscribe. The past isn't done with you yet.